have three ministers who would be addressing you, the media. We would first have the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Colm Imbert. He would be followed by Minister of Tourism, the Honourable Shamfa, Cudjoe, and Minister Stuart Young is here to take whatever additional questions you all would have on matters outside of those discussed by the two ministers. So I'll immediately turn you over to Minister Imbert.
Thank you very much. In keeping with our commitment to provide as much information as we can with respect to the finances of the country, I wish to report on the government's borrowing program for fiscal 2016. In February of 2016, the Cabinet approved $3 billion bond issue on the domestic market to finance the deficit in the 2016 budget. And I think I should explain the concept of a deficit because there's a lot of misinformation outside there. When you have a national budget, you would have a financing gap if you're running a deficit. In this fiscal year, in the mid-year review, I announced that the budget deficit for this year is now estimated at about $7 billion. That $7 billion has to be financed in some way. And I had also indicated at the time that it would be financed through a combination of borrowing and drawdown from the stabilization fund. As part of the financing of the difference between income and expenditure, because that's all it is. The government gets income from many sources, such as tax revenue, dividends from the National Gas Corporation, sale of assets, and so on. And then you would have an expenditure figure which is more than the income. And that's how you arrive at a deficit, which is financed through borrowing and a drawdown from the stabilization fund. So we got approval in February to borrow $3 billion on the local market. And the first $1 billion was settled in May when the central bank, on behalf of the government, conducted an auction system whereby we went to the market and asked for financial institutions to indicate how much of the $1 billion they wish to participate in. The way the auction system works is that banks and financial institutions are eligible to bid for the entire $1 billion, which is quite unlikely, or they can bid for 100 million. So you might have one bank, say Republic Bank, might bid for 200 million, Scotiabank $1 billion, FCB, 100 million, FCB 100 million. And when all the bids are in, you determine whether you have met your target of 1,000 million or $1 billion. In this particular auction done for the government by the central bank, the total bids received amounted to $1.88 billion, which gave us some confidence because it indicated that local financial institutions still had an appetite for government debt. When an auction is oversubscribed, you would not normally take the excess because we were offering 1,000 million or $1 billion in government debt. In this particular case, we decided to take 1.1 billion out of the 1.8 billion that was offered. The interest rate was 4.75%. The way it works is that as each bidder bids in the auction, and as you get closer to the target of $1 billion, you use the prevailing interest rate, well, the rate that the bidders bid. But if, for example, you got $900 million in bids at 4.5%, and then the last 100 million was bid at 4.75%, then all of the other participants are raised to 4.75%. So when I looked at this, I thought that perhaps we could do this another way, because it means that the last group coming in on the bid could have the ability to influence the interest rate that the government is paying. And in fact, this is exactly what happened. So that whereas the majority of the bids were at 4.5%, the last set were at 4.75, which meant the entire 1.1 billion was taken up at 4.75. So for the remaining 2 billion, I instructed the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance to use another approach, which is called a request for proposals. So that's not an auction. In an auction, it's all done very quickly, and it's done according to particular rules. And one of them is that you have to raise everybody to the level of the last group coming in. In a request for proposals, you simply invite banks to make offers with respect to the amount of money that the government wants to borrow. So that we went with the request for proposal solution with respect to the second $2 billion of local debt that we're seeking to borrow. And I'm happy to say that at the end of the evaluation procedure, the Cabinet has decided to award the bond for $2 billion at a rate of 4.5%, so that the request for proposals actually worked out quite well. We were able to get a single bidder willing to give us an interest rate of 4.5%, whereas with the auction system, we had to pay 4.75%. So the second $2 billion has been done, in my opinion, a little more efficiently than the first $2 billion, using a completely different system, because I felt we should try something different. The next set of financing that the government is going to do is we're going on the international market. And Cabinet approved in May a recommendation from the Ministry of Finance that we go overseas and do what is called a roadshow to raise $1 billion to finance not just the remainder of the 2016 fiscal year, but also this will take us forward into 2017. And I will be traveling overseas in July for this roadshow, and essentially what it involves is a presentation by myself and my officials, including senior officials in the Ministry of Finance and representatives from the central bank. We'll be making a presentation to foreign banks on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and inviting them to participate in an international bond of 1,000 million or $1 billion. This was previously done in 2014 by the previous government, and they managed to raise $550 million using the roadshow format. And essentially, it's quite a grueling exercise. You visit various cities. In this particular case, we'll be going to Boston, Chicago, New York, and possibly Los Angeles. And you make presentations to all of the premier international banks and institutions in the United States, and you invite them to participate in a bond issue by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. It will be in US dollars. The benefit of an international bond, having borrowed already $3 billion on the local market, TT, this has affected our liquidity. And we will have to make some adjustments to the liquidity in Trinidad and Tobago if we are to go forward with further significant sums of local borrowing at this point in time. By going overseas, there's no issue of liquidity. $1 billion for the international market is a drop in the ocean for them. It's a huge sum of money for us, over $6 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. But the value of going overseas is that you get US dollars, which then are added to our foreign reserves when they come in, and you will be paying back over a period of years. So you can imagine we will get $1 billion will go immediately to enhancing our country's foreign reserves, and then we may pay back 80 million, 100 million over a period of 10 to 12 years. So it's a very useful tool in terms of getting much needed foreign exchange. You may also get better rates because the rates on the international market are, in some instances, better than in Trinidad and Tobago. You engender confidence in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago because once the foreign banks indicate an appetite for Trinidad and Tobago debt, that raises the profile of the country. And there are many other benefits that will derive from this. But based on this borrowing program, where we have concluded our local borrowing program for this fiscal year with $3 billion on the local market, and we're now moving to 3 billion TT, we're now moving to borrow 1 billion US on the international financial market, we should have sufficient funds to deal with some of the cash flow problems that we've been experiencing, to deal with our capital program, our public sector investment program, and so on. And before I finish, there's a recurring theme that seems to be coming up with respect to the recent withdrawal from the Heritage Fund. I was at pains to state that the drawdown was 2.5 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. I made it clear in my statement to the Parliament, which was widely publicized, that it was 2.5 TT billion. And yet, for some strange reason, it is still being reported by some people as 2.5 billion US dollars. I don't know why. And I want to reiterate that when the Prime Minister spoke in his address to the nation around the end of last year, he said that the government intended to draw up to 1 billion US dollars from the Heritage Fund. He was very clear about that. In my mid-year review in April, I indicated that I repeated what the Honourable Prime Minister had said, that we'll be drawing down up to 1 billion US dollars from the Heritage Fund. We, in fact, withdrew 2.5 billion TT, which is equivalent to 375 million US dollars. So we are way below the amount predicted by myself at 1 billion US and the Prime Minister at 1 billion US. And I'm just hoping that we can now put this matter to rest. We are way below the figures. There's no contradiction. There's no misinterpretation. It's just some misunderstanding that has a life of its own and keeps revolving. So I hope this is now clarified. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm here to report on the developments as it relates to the Maracas Beach project. We are moving forward with immediate and urgent remedial works treating with the sewer treatment plant and the drainage works at Maracas. Within the next week, we expect to award contracts for immediate remedial work to be done to ensure that we have a proper and effective system as it relates to sewer treatment in the meantime, and drainage works. Those contracts will be issued within the next week. In the meantime, the Ministry of Tourism has engaged other government agencies like WASA and PURE to do immediate maintenance work. As of Saturday past June 11th, WASA would have gone to Maracas and done some work on the site along with PURE. So we expect within the next week for the works relating to the remedial contracts relating to remedial works to go out. We are working with NIDCO, who is going to supervise and coordinate the project in going forward, and the government has taken the decision to split this project into 3 packages. The first package would be done by PURE, and that's to deal with the road and drainage works. The second package is dealing with the vending booths and buildings like the washrooms, and that will be handled by NIDCO. And the third and final package is dealing with the sewer and water treatment plant, and that would also be handled by NIDCO. The entire project, as I said before, would be managed, supervised, and coordinated by NIDCO.
Thank you, members of the media. Thank you, colleagues. And now we'll field a few quick questions.
Faye Richards, TV6 News. Minister Imbert, given the surplus that you'll generate if you get that $1 billion US abroad, do you anticipate that you will not need to maximize the HSF window that Prime Minister Rowley established in his address to the nation in January of the $1 billion US?
When I spoke in Parliament on Friday, I said that the maximum amount that we are eligible to withdraw by law is 4.5 billion TT dollars, which is about 675 million US dollars. So even though the Prime Minister and myself had indicated that we wished, if we could, withdraw up to 1,000 million or 1 billion US dollars, the law would only permit us to withdraw 675 million, of which we've already withdrawn 375 million US dollars. I also said in that statement in Parliament that at this time, it is not our intention to withdraw the balance, the additional 300 million US dollars that is still available to the government by law. We are leaving it at the 375 million US for the time being, and we're monitoring the situation. We're looking at expenses between now and the end of the year. You just have 3.5 months to go in this fiscal year. So you have the rest of June, July, August, and September. So we're looking at it. Fortunately, June is an end of quarter month, and this is something people need to understand, that in Trinidad and Tobago, the majority of revenue comes in at the end of each quarter, because that's when companies, corporations pay their tax. So they pay them in December, in March, in June, in September. The revenues that come in the slow months, which January, February, April, May, July, August, and so on, October, November, those are slow months. You don't get much revenue. So you get revenue flows come in a cycle up and down. So fortunately, June is an end of quarter month. Budgets have told me that we should get some significant tax revenue coming in at the end of this month. So we look at that together with the $2 billion bond issue, TT billion that we just raised on the local market, and hopefully we'll be able to manage our finances towards the end of this fiscal year to the end of September. So we may not even draw down that additional 300 million US dollars that's available from the stabilization fund. But if we have to, we will, because that's what it's for. But at this time, there's no plan to do that. And certainly not to draw down the whole billion US, no.
Just wondering, in the fact that you mentioned that it has been done going abroad on this roadshow 2 years ago.
Yes.
Given the difference in our economic picture from 2 years ago to now,
Yes.
do you expect it to be a more difficult sell?
I don't expect it to be a more difficult sell, but what I expect is that the interest rate would be a little bit higher at this point in time, because 2 years ago, 2014, oil prices had begun to drop. They began to drop in July of 2014, but they were still very high. In July 2014, the price of oil was over $100 a barrel. So things were still looking good for Trinidad and Tobago then, so that we would have got a good interest rate at that point in time. I expect on this occasion, we may have to pay another what they call 50 basis points, another 0.5% or 0.25%, as the case may be. But I'm confident in the ability of the government and myself to sell Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm not worried. I mean, look at the bonds that we just got. We put out $1 billion through auction. We got bids of $1.9 billion. We've then gone for a further $2 billion. We got bids from over 10 institutions. We were able to do very careful selection, and we've got another $2 billion on the local market. So the confidence is there in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm comfortable. I think we can do it.
Minister Young, could you seeing that the anti-gang bill heads to Parliament tomorrow for debate? How confident are you? Because the last time you were here, you spoke about soliciting support from the opposition for passage of the bill. How confident are you that the garner that support? And in the same breath, what is your view on the Tabakit MP's spin on the Prime Minister's comments from the St. Joseph meeting last night, re-crying?
All right, let me start with the latter part of your question. First, I have not heard the Tabakit Member of Parliament's comments on the Prime Minister's talk from St. Joseph a couple of nights ago, with respect to the bill that's going forward in the lower house tomorrow, we are confident because ultimately, as I said on the last occasion, this is something that is being done for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. It is a very necessary tool in the fight against crime. This is a special majority piece of legislation. All we're doing and simply doing is extending the time of legislation for 2 years, hence from August 2016 to August 2018, and this is a continuation of something that was given birth under the UNC administration. So the burden really falls on the opposition at this stage, and the opposition of who the nation's eyes will be focused on, and they would have to have a very, very good explanation to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago as to why they would not want to continue this tool that all law enforcement agencies have indicated is necessary in the fight against crime. The government is doing the responsible thing. All we're doing is extending the time by 2 years. So the opposition really are the ones I respectfully say have to carry the burden tomorrow, because they must explain to the nation what their position is. And we hope, we've had discussions with them and they've told us they're still in caucus on it, but we certainly do hope that the opposition would be responsible for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. This is not a government initiative, it's a continuation by government. And we trust and hope that the opposition will be responsible because they are answerable to every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago.
Because if I might, that particular statement took, the Prime Minister spoke about losing the war against criminal elements, and that statement essentially was translated into meaning this administration is failing on crime.
If that is what was said by the member for Tabakit, he is playing politics with crime. We as a responsible government have come out, and even when we were in opposition, you would recall that we supported 96% of the legislation whilst we were in opposition. We see ourselves as being a very responsible government. We have a very pragmatic Prime Minister who is indicating that his head is not buried in the sand, and we acknowledge frontally that crime is an issue that affects every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and we as a government have been moving initiatives both through legislation as well as driving things from the National Security Council to try and make Trinidad and Tobago a more safe place for every citizen. So I disagree with the member for Tabakit's spin, as you've put it.
Another thing, you would see lately you have all this prevalence of leakage of very compromising videos and so on. And this also speaks to the issue of cybercrime. So where, I believe that's somewhere in the government's agenda to strengthen.
Correct. It is on the government's legislative agenda. And as you may be aware, yesterday the Attorney General led the first round of public consultation by this government with respect to cybercrime legislation affecting cybercrime, the Data Protection Act, etc. It is something we're actively moving towards, and we have the amendments being drafted. But we're engaging in a level of consultation as well with the members of the media who had expressed some level of concern when there was a bill before the Houses in 2014, 2015. But it is something that we are going to bring the legislation in rein with.
Okay, but is there any specific assurance that you could possibly give these persons who have their photos being leaked all over the internet, and even persons who might be blackmailed on the basis of it? What kind of assurance could be given to them that their concerns will be treated with in an expeditious manner?
The assurance and what is in control of this government is bringing the legislation and effective legislation to Parliament as quickly as possible. The law enforcement agencies who are charged with the responsibility of dealing with the criminal aspects of what we've seen taking place within recent days, I think last night and in the course of yesterday, and it's reported today, have indicated that the continued publication and exchange of these things are criminal acts, and we would expect the law enforcement agencies to act appropriately, and in particular the cybercrime unit of the TTPS.
If I could just bring Minister Cudjoe in for us a bit here. Minister, in relation to the Maracas project, given what you just announced, how is the project over budget at this point in time, and if so, by how much? And perhaps you could also maybe expand a little bit on what the Prime Minister said on Tuesday night about sandals and a possible resort in Tobago.
I'm sorry. The Maracas project, as it relates to how much money has been paid to the stakeholders or the contractors, the mobilization was paid in the very beginning to the tune of about $20 million. We are at this point in time auditing the receipts, or should I say the invoices of CISL and Lee Young and so on as we move to go forward with this project.
If I may help Minister Cudjoe, because the responsibility of managing that aspect of the contract has been passed over to the Office of the Attorney General. We have been managing it. The termination of the contractor, Calcoke, came upon the receipt of legal advice that they should so do. It was found in this instance that an abnormally large sum was paid on mobilization, and as Minister Cudjoe has just indicated, we have QSs on site who have been doing their work, ascertaining exactly what was done to do a value for money audit that is undergoing. But parallel to this, the necessary movements forward are taking place, as Minister Cudjoe had indicated, and the government is moving expeditiously to complete the project.
Ian Wilson, CTV, C News. The unions are calling to put on the legislative agenda a bill to protect the working class, and so they can prevent what had happened to workers at ArcelorMittal and things like that. And they are calling for retrenchment to stop. Is this receiving immediate attention?
The Minister of Labour has been meeting with the trade unions and actively participating in discussion with them. There is already legislation in place to protect the workforce. Of course, we as a government are always looking and listening to see what improvements can be made with respect to legislation.
In the last parliament, there was on the legislative agenda, although they didn't get a chance to bring it to the parliament, time ran out, and the insurance bill arising out of the CLICO fallout. Is there any plans by this government to bring it on the legislative agenda this parliament?
All right. I don't think that was the genesis of that bill. It had nothing to do with the CLICO fallout. That is a piece of legislation that had been around for many, many years, and in fact had gone through several joint select committees. I've already said in Parliament, and I'll say it again today, that I intend to relay the insurance bill that was tabled in the Parliament last year. And I've already approached the Leader of the Opposition for the support of the opposition, because it requires a special majority. And in order to avoid any complications, I have told the Leader of the Opposition that we intend to lay the legislation as is where is, without changing anything, so that we don't get into any contentious argument or delays. So those pieces of legislation would be laid on the table in the Parliament shortly. Another piece of legislation that will be laid on the table in a similar fashion, because it had a similar history and also went to a committee as well, is the gambling amendment legislation that I've also told the Leader of the Opposition, or approached the Leader of the Opposition, let me put it that way, and asked for the opposition support for that piece of gaming legislation, which is being brought back exactly in the same format as it was before. I don't intend to change a word, so that I don't get into any argument over it, because these things are just very, very important and should not be delayed by political bickering. And as we go along, we can look at it as a country and a parliament and see how these pieces of legislation work, but I don't want to waste any time by trying to make amendments that would lead to a contentious argument at this point in time. So both the insurance bill and the gaming and gambling bill of 2015 are going to be relayed in the Parliament very shortly in their form as they were before.
Minister Imbert, I just want some clarification here. You said the first bond issue, you took 1.1 billion?
Got cabinet approval to borrow 3 billion TT dollars on the local market in tranches. The first tranche was of the order of approximately 1 billion. It was oversubscribed to the tune of 1.88 billion. And since we were cutting off at 4.75%, we took the offers that were at 4.75%, and it came up to approximately 1.1 billion. So we accepted 1.1 billion out of the 1.88 billion.
Right. 1.1 billion, and then you took an additional 2 billion.
We went with the second tranche, which was a $2 billion bond issue on the local market using a different approach. The first one was an auction system. The second one was a request for proposal system. So that $2 billion second tranche has reached completion and was before cabinet this morning.
So what I'm getting at is you took eventually 3.1 billion.
More or less, yes, 3.1 billion. That is TT dollars is what we have raised on the local market as part of our borrowing program for this year. Okay?
Right. On the Maracas Bay project,
Yes.
how much money has been expended on this project, and how much do you expect? Because the original project was, I think, 120 million that was awarded to Cancun, and then we discovered things.
Correct. What from memory, I think we've expended somewhere between, the government had expended somewhere between 18 and 20 million dollars. No further sums have been expended by the government since we have come into office. So what we moved immediately to do is to do an assessment of the program that is being completed as we speak. And after that, we will decide how we go about trying to recover any overpayments that may be made. But the important point is, parallel to this, both Minister Cudjoe and other colleagues are working towards the completion of the project and having a proper assessment done on a value for money basis to ensure that there's no overpayment going forward.
But we had expended money before the government came into office, so...
Correct. And that is now, well, that's now been ring-fenced, let's call it that, the monies that were paid, and the lawyers are looking at that now to see how we may recover if there has in fact been any overpayment to the contractor that has been terminated.
But what the minister was saying, it's approximately $20 billion.
Million.
Sorry, million. I have billion in my head.
Million finance is getting carried away with
20
billions.
million had been spent approximately before. So that's the amount that has already been paid, approximately $20 million.
There has been, this week the president issued a release, and there was some confusion in the public domain about the appointment of two boards of directors, the EMA and the Tobago Regional Health Authority. And the president felt compelled to issue a press release saying that the delay was not his fault.
Let me help you. I think what His Excellency was seeking to do is to point out that he acted swiftly upon receiving the instruments of appointment from the Solicitor General. The way these things work, if it's a state company, then the letters of appointment are issued by myself as Minister of Finance. If it's a statutory authority, in some instances, the line minister would issue the letters of appointment. My memory tells me the airports authority is like that. So the legislation will say that the members are appointed by the minister. But some laws, such as the law dealing with the Environmental Management Authority, would say that the instruments of appointment are issued by the president. Whenever the cabinet makes a decision of this nature to appoint a board to one of these entities, the instruments of appointment have to be prepared by the Solicitor General for onward transmission to President's House for His Excellency to sign. He has a process. When he receives the instruments, he has his own advisors who would look at it to make sure that they're all done properly, everything is in order, that all of the statutory requirements, the legal requirements have been met, and then he would sign the instruments. The point His Excellency was making is that he acts swiftly. So if there was any delay, it was at the Solicitor General. That's the point he was making. Okay, so he didn't want to be blamed for any delays. It's not him. He got it and he acted on it within 2 days. But there was a long time between the cabinet decision and the issue of the instruments to him by the Solicitor General. That's the point he was making. It's just a process. It's a convoluted process that causes a lot of trouble. causes us as a government a lot of trouble. We have to put pressure on the system and get the Solicitor General's office to prepare these instruments and get them out fast. So I think he was just trying to make it clear that it wasn't him.
Thank you.
Minister Young, just for clarification, did you say that the contract awarded to Calco was terminated?
Yes.
Who terminated the contract, and on what basis was it terminated?
As I said, and I've said before, the contract was terminated on the basis of legal advice obtained. The employer of Calco in that instance is a company called CISL. So CISL terminated Calco, must be at least a month and a half ago, a month ago.
Are there any, well, if there's an assessment being done, and still being done, into the value for money, on what basis was the contractor terminated?
With every termination of a contract, post-termination, you now get possession of the site. Because remember, up to that point, the contractor would have possession of the site. So they would have been terminated based on the legal advice received. That legal advice would have been based on the fact scenario presented, which is, and I don't want to get into it because it is a matter that is likely to go to arbitration, so it will be somewhat sub judice, but it would have been found that progress was not being made in the manner that it should have been being made in. It was being done as quickly as possible. They hadn't progressed as much as they should have as at that point in time. And based on the standards of work that should have been performed.
Was, I mean, we've seen a couple of reports in the media recently as to the payment of money owed to contractors. How do you expect contractors to deliver work if they're not being paid?
But whoever said in this instance the contractor wasn't being paid, I've just stated, Minister Imbert has stated it as well. In this instance, there was a payment of between $18 and $20 million, which was way above the standard you would expect in a FIDIC type contract for mobilization fees. So there's an argument there actually was an overpayment to the contractor in this instance. So it is not an instance where there can be an allegation of lack of payment.
You mentioned arbitration, but does the government not stand to lose more or put out more in an arbitration process against the contractor?
Not necessarily, no, because of course the government will be making claims against any contractor that it terminates.
We also heard the minister mention that NIDCO and Pure is about to take over some of the packages for this project.
Correct.
How do we, there were claims made by, the Contractors Association that there are several contractors still owed money by Pure and NIDCO. So how are we about to execute parts of a project if Pure and NIDCO are still owing money to contractors?
Well, as you would appreciate, every contract is a separate contract. So what Cabinet took a decision a couple of weeks ago was to separate for the completion of this Maracas project, as the minister said, into 3 packages. 2 of the packages will be managed by NIDCO, 1 will be managed by Pure. These contractual arrangements, of course, will have nothing to do with other contracts that NIDCO would have ongoing with other entities.
Minister Young, there were workers who marched this week in Tobago concerned about job losses from the closure of the Human Capital Facilitation Development Company, as well as the shutting down of the Ministry of Tobago Development. Is there any response to them on their job security?
Well, you said that they are concerned. What this government did is it took decisions based on a report that was prepared that showed that there was a lot of abnormality in the awards of employment contracts to contract workers and at very unusual times. So all those who are in the permanent workforce, that is the public service, who would have been in the former Ministry of Tobago Development, Cabinet decided that they should be redeployed into other areas of the public service now, so there'll be no job loss there. With respect to contract workers, if there's a surplus amount of contract workers who are employed and not employed in the right circumstances, government was not going to continue to just have them employed in those circumstances. So a decision was taken to wind up that company. Corporation Seoul is in the process of doing that, and there is going to be fallout as a result.
And the fact is that the Prime Minister has said, and the Cabinet was informed, that that company was simply duplicating the work of the Tobago House of Assembly, and that the company was therefore in breach of the THA Act and was really not necessary. It was a political thing that was designed to try to give the partnership a foothold into to Tobago. They formed a company to duplicate the work of the House of Assembly. So we came in, and we're looking at areas of duplication, waste, mismanagement, and so on. And we found this company having no purpose, serves no useful purpose. You have a Tobago House of Assembly with the legal authority to manage the affairs of Tobago, and to have a company just doing exactly the same thing that the THA is doing was really a waste of time and money. So that we didn't think in all conscience we could continue this. And it was also in breach of the THA Act. So it was setting up a very contentious situation between Trinidad and Tobago. Might even have found ourselves before a dispute resolution commission or even the courts in terms of the locus standi of this company. So there was absolutely no reason for it to continue.
We'll field 2 more questions, looking at the time.
Wondering if there's been a spot or location picked out yet for where the Sandals Resort may set up?
At this stage, the conversation is continuing with Sandals, and at the appropriate time, when we've reached a stage that we can talk more about it, we will. I think Minister Imbert wants to jump in at this stage to talk about debts owing to contractors.
Yes,
so
I've noticed some newspaper reports, and the reporter just now referred to contractors' debts. I need to put this in perspective. When we were doing the 2016 budget, of course, we had about 3 weeks to do a budget. At that time, there was no indication whatsoever that contracts had been entered into and that invoices had been submitted to various state corporations and that debts were owed to contractors for work done during the election period. We did not know that. So as time has evolved, we are discovering every day a new contract and a new debt that was left for us as a gift by the former administration. So that I saw an estimate in The Guardian, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but I saw an estimate obviously based on statements made by the contractors themselves that they are owed $2 billion for work done in the election year. Now, we as a government, we didn't cater for that. I certainly didn't cater for it as Minister of Finance, an extra $2 billion in debts incurred by the UNC that now have to be settled by the PNM. So that we have to deal with this in 2 ways. In the same way we're handed the gift of $5 billion in back pay, which we don't have easy recourse to money for, but we're now doing it in various ways. One of them is raising money on the local market and so on. I will now have to, after having assessed how much money it is, we'll have to work out a financing mechanism because we simply don't have the cash flow to simply find $2 billion and pay to contractors for work done for the last election. Can't do that. You just don't have the money. So that the first stage is to audit, because you heard Minister Young talk about the Maracas project, where the contractor got a 20%, almost 20% mobilization, when you normally get 5%, at most 10%. And that is not unique. There are many projects where mobilization fees were paid way in excess of the norm. When you go and check, no work was ever done. And there are invoices coming in where when you go and check, the work that is stated on the invoice doesn't exist. So we are faced with this problem. Yes, there will be contractors who have legitimately done work for the past government, whose bills are now coming in. That is true. Some of these bills will be genuine, but some of them may not be. So we as a government, we can't just pay just so, because we are being presented with bills. We have to go and determine whether the work was actually done, because it was done before we came into office in an election period where the last government was extremely reckless. So one of the things we've been doing over the last 8 months is determining whether this money is actually due. And eventually, having established what it is, we're going to go to the market, raise money, either by way of a bond or some other financing mechanism, and we can start paying the contractors. The contractors themselves have actually suggested that we give them bonds. And that was done many years ago under a former government who was faced with a similar challenge coming in after an election, being faced with bills from contractors. They gave them bonds. So we in the Ministry of Finance are considering all of these things, all of these options. But our first challenge is to determine whether the money is really due, whether there was any corruption or fraud involved, and how much is actually genuinely due to contractors for work done in the election year.
Thank you. Last question.
Secondly, to Minister of Tourism, the Soca on the Seas initiative that was announced some months ago has had its naysayers and gainsayers. Government is continuing with that project, or that initiative. Also, one can ask Minister.
You're going to have to choose your last question. Go on. Are we running against the clock?
Given yesterday's indication by the UNC opposition of that challenge to the Constitution that they at least put in the government's way with respect to the appointment of
a Commissioner of Police.
Yes, what will the government's, who represented the government in terms of that motion? And to Minister of Finance, Mr. Colm Imbert, you indicated that your preference would be for, that is in terms of for foreign borrowing states in the United States. It means then that you probably negated approaches to the IMF, to the World Bank, and to the Asian markets in the context of getting the monies that you see.
First, let me clear up something. Just because you have 3 ministers here doesn't mean you could ask 3 questions. Eh? If you had 4, you would ask 4. If you had 5, you see that? You're doing that every week. Eh? No, that's not going to happen. Okay, this is the last 3. But let me just deal with them in the reverse order. I don't have any preference for foreign borrowing. We have a mix. So we've borrowed $3 billion on the local market. We're now going overseas to see what sort of terms and conditions we'll get, whether we get a more attractive interest rate. We're doing it to boost the companies' ratings, their sovereign ratings in the international market. We're doing it to boost the country's profile, to give international investors confidence in Trinidad and Tobago. And we're also doing it to bring in some foreign reserves that will boost our stock of foreign reserves, which we can then use to give to manufacturers and so on. We don't borrow from the IMF. You borrow from the IMF when you're gone through. Trinidad and Tobago has not gone through, because if it was so, then we would not be able to raise $3 billion on the local market, our bonds would not be oversubscribed, and we would not have investment-grade ratings from Standard & Poor's and Moody's. We have very good investment-grade ratings from the rating agencies. So I hope that clears that up.
So Minister Imbert used up 2.5 minutes of the last 3 minutes. I'll pass over to Minister Cudjoe, and then I'll wrap up.
Okay, as it relates to the Soca on the Seas initiative, the Ministry of Tourism had contributed $65,000 to the media launch and marketing promo event, and the Ministry of Culture would have contributed $225,000 towards the payment of artists, and that really represents the extent to which the government has and will be supporting this event.
Thank you very much. To close off, you've asked about the matter that was heard in court yesterday, so by definition is sub judice, so I wouldn't want to say too much. We had Mr. Douglas Mendez leading a team, and I also saw Mr. Russell Martino representing the Police Service Commission. Again, this was an initiative that this government had promised when we were campaigning prior to the elections, which was to simplify the process for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police. We believe we'll fulfill that mandate, as the Prime Minister is on record as saying it is very important for the morale of the police service and also for an effective management of the police service to have a permanent Commissioner of Police, and that is what we're aiming to do. The matter is now before the courts. We think the opposition was irresponsible in taking the matter before the courts, but it's now before the courts, and we await the court's decision. Members of the media, I'd like to thank you all very much as usual for this session this afternoon, and do have a pleasant rest of your afternoon. Thank you.